The 11:59 p.m. commuter train, a lumbering beast of steel and flickering lights. It sliced through the thick veil of night, carrying weary souls home. But tonight, the train held a secret buried within the cold, metallic shell of train car 17. The train shuddered to a halt, its arrival heralded by the hiss of escaping steam. The platform, normally bustling with late-night travelers, stood eerily deserted. The first sign of something amiss was the silence. No muffled conversations, no rustling newspapers, no weary sighs. Just an unnerving emptiness emanating from car 17. The conductor, a grizzled veteran of the rails, felt a chill crawl down his spine. He had seen a lot in his years on the job, but this was different. His hand trembled as he reached for the car door. The air inside was stagnant and cold, heavy with the metallic scent of blood. Fear, primal and instinctive, tightened its grip on his heart. The car was empty. Rows of seats, usually occupied by weary commuters, stood vacant, shrouded in shadows. The police arrived, their sirens a jarring counterpoint to the eerie silence that had settled over the platform. The platform, bathed in the harsh glare of flashing lights, took on an almost surreal quality. Shadows danced and twisted, whispering tales of unimaginable horrors. The investigators moved with practiced efficiency, their faces grim masks in the flickering blue light. Every inch of car 17 was scrutinized, every surface dusted for prints. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the unseen horror that had unfolded within those walls. A lone glove lay discarded on the floor, its mate nowhere to be found. A single blood-stained shoe rested beneath a seat, as if its owner had simply vanished into thin air. Detective Riley shivered, pulling his coat tighter against the biting night air. It was always colder at a crime scene, he mused. Or maybe it was the silence. The oppressive, unnatural silence that clung to train car 17 like a shroud. He watched his team work, their movements swift and practiced. They were like phantoms themselves, moving through the eerie green glow of the forensic lights. Each flash of a camera bulb seemed to further drain the air of life, leaving a vacuum of fear in its wake. Riley stepped into the car, the stench of stale blood hitting him like a physical blow. The blood was everywhere, splattered across the walls, smeared on the windows, pooling on the floor. It was as if someone had taken a paintbrush dipped in crimson and unleashed a torrent of violence upon the car. Riley knelt beside a particularly large splatter, its dark shape resembling a grotesque butterfly pinned to the wall. The metallic scent made his stomach churn. How much blood had been shed here, and more importantly, whose blood was it? He rose, his gaze sweeping over the carnage. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle beyond the bloodstains themselves. Empty coffee cups sat on tables, newspapers lay discarded on seats, a half-eaten sandwich lay abandoned on a tray. Everyday objects frozen in time, offering mute testimony to the lives that had been interrupted. Riley picked up a crumpled napkin, its surface stained with a dark blotch. Wine, he thought, or maybe juice. Someone had been enjoying a late-night snack, oblivious to the horror that was about to unfold. He let the napkin fall back onto the table, his gaze drawn to a single high-heeled shoe lying on its side beneath the seat. It was a woman's shoe, sleek and black, clearly expensive. He had to focus on the facts, on the evidence before him. Forensic technician Sam, a wiry man with nervous energy, approached Riley, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He held up a small handheld tape recorder, its black plastic casing gleaming dully in the dim light. "Found this tucked under one of the seats," Sam said, his voice hushed. "It's the old-fashioned kind with a cassette tape." Riley took the recorder, his fingers brushing against Sam's. It was ice cold, as if it had been stored in a freezer. "Think there's something on it?" Riley asked, his voice barely a whisper. He pressed the play button. The tape whirred to life, the sound amplified in the unnerving silence of the train car. Static crackled through the small speaker, sharp and piercing, like insects chirping in the dead of night. Riley held his breath, his gaze fixed on the spinning cassette, as if expecting it to reveal its secrets at any moment. Then a voice, faint at first, barely audible above the hiss of static. A man's voice, laced with fear, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. "We're trapped. There's nowhere to go," the voice whispered, each word heavy with terror. "They're coming. They're coming." The static surged again, threatening to swallow the voice entirely. "Don't let them take us. We have to." Then, another voice. This one higher-pitched, tinged with hysteria. A woman's voice, pleading, begging for mercy. The static seemed to recede as if allowing their terror to take center stage. "Please," she sobbed, her words choked with fear. "We didn't mean to. We just wanted to get home." The voices overlapped now, a chorus of fear and desperation echoing through the empty train car. Riley felt a chill crawl down his spine, despite the warmth of his coat. The air in the car seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the very walls were closing in on them. The pleas for mercy morphed into screams, blood-curdling shrieks of terror that ripped through the silence of the train car, their raw anguish amplified by the small speaker. Riley felt his stomach clench, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. The screams reached a fever pitch, then abruptly stopped. Silence descended once more, heavier, more oppressive than before. Riley stood frozen, the tape recorder still clutched in his hand, the echo of the screams ringing in his ears. A strangled gasp escaped Sam's lips. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth as if to stifle a scream of his own. Then, a clicking sound as the tape reached its end. The whirring of the motor ceased, plunging the train car back into an unsettling silence. The silence of the grave. Riley lowered the recorder, his hand trembling slightly. He felt drained, as if all his energy had been sucked out of him. The screams, the pleas, the whispers of unimaginable horrors, they had left an indelible mark on his soul. But the mystery of Train Car 17 remained unsolved. The silence after the tape clicked off seemed to amplify the screams that still echoed in Riley's ears. It was the silence of a tomb, heavy and final, a stark contrast to the cacophony of terror that had just played out. The air itself seemed thick with the residue of fear, a palpable presence that sent shivers down his spine. He looked at Sam, his partner's face ashen, eyes wide and unblinking, like a man who had stared into the abyss and seen something unspeakable reflected back at him. "What the hell was that?" Sam finally whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the hum of the fluorescent lights. Riley shook his head, unable to articulate the horror that clawed at the edges of his mind. The voices on the tape, filled with such raw, primal fear, spoke of something beyond human comprehension. They spoke of something coming for them, Riley said, his voice a low murmur, breaking the silence that had settled over them. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture doing little to soothe his frayed nerves. "Something not human," Sam added, his voice barely a whisper. He picked up the tape recorder, turning it over and over in his hands as if it held the answers to the mysteries of the universe. Something that took them. The bloodstains, the screams, the whispers of madness captured on the tape, all pointed to a horror that defied logic and reason. "What do we tell them, Riley?" Sam asked, his voice tight with apprehension. "The brass, the press. What do we tell them about what happened here?" The investigation continued through the night, a flurry of activity in the face of the unknown. Forensics dusted for prints, photographers captured the scene in all its gruesome detail, but the silence of Train Car 17 remained unbroken. The victims had vanished, leaving behind only traces of their existence, whispers of their terror etched into the very fabric of the train. Riley watched the activity with a detached curiosity, his mind still replaying the screams from the tape, the chilling finality of their silence. The victims had become ghosts, their presence felt but unseen, their fate a mystery that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. He walked the length of the car, his footsteps echoing in the stillness, his gaze sweeping over the bloodstains, the discarded belongings, the silent witnesses to an unspeakable horror. The silence of train car 17 was more than just an absence of sound. It was a void, an emptiness that spoke volumes about the horrors that lay hidden beneath the surface of their world. As dawn approached, casting a pale, sickly light over the city, Riley stood alone in the train car, the weight of the unsolved case heavy on his shoulders. The other officers had retreated to the warmth of their cars. He stared out the window at the deserted platform. But the shadows of train car 17 seemed to linger. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled with a primal fear. He turned slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. But there was nothing there. Or was there? A faint breeze seemed to stir the air inside the car. Riley held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He could have sworn he saw a flicker of movement in the reflection of the window. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Riley stood frozen, his senses on high alert. The silence of train car 17 seemed to deepen. He was no longer sure if he was the hunter or the hunted. The investigation hit a wall of silence, of missing pieces, of whispers that led to dead ends. Riley felt the frustration gnawing at him, a constant companion as he chased shadows and chased leads that evaporated like mist. The evidence was a cruel joke. Bloodstains, yes, but no DNA matches. A tape recording filled with screams and whispers, but no identifiable voices, no context, no clues to the victims' identities. The more they dug, the deeper the mystery became. It's like they just vanished, Sam muttered one afternoon, his frustration mirroring Riley's own. They were hunched over files spread across Riley's desk, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the rustle of dead-end reports. Riley grunted, rubbing a hand over his weary eyes. Sleep had become a distant memory, replaced by a constant low-level hum of anxiety. He felt like he was caught in a nightmare, chasing phantoms through the labyrinthine corridors of his own mind. The silence of train car 17 was deafening, a constant reminder of their failure to penetrate the heart of the mystery. And as the days turned into weeks, the case grew colder, the trail fading like footprints in the sand. Theories swirled around the station like dust devils, each one more outlandish than the last. Terrorism, a mass hallucination, alien abduction. Riley listened patiently, his expression carefully neutral, as his colleagues spun tales of the impossible. "I'm telling you, it's a government cover-up," Detective Miller, a veteran with a penchant for conspiracy theories, declared one evening in the break room. "They're experimenting on people, and those poor souls on the train. They saw something they shouldn't have." Riley took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste doing little to dispel the fatigue that had settled deep in his bones. "And the tape recorder?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "They just left that behind as a calling card?" Miller shrugged, his eyes gleaming with a fanatic light. "To throw us off the scent, of course. Make it look like something else." Riley sighed inwardly. He couldn't fault his colleagues for their wild speculations. The silence of train car 17 bred fear, and fear, as he knew all too well, could twist even the most rational mind into knots of paranoia. The city, in its relentless pursuit of the next headline, had moved on. The mystery of train car 17, once a front-page sensation, had been relegated to the back pages, a fading curiosity in the ever-churning news cycle. But for Riley, the case remained an open wound, a constant ache in the back of his mind. He found himself drawn back to the train yard, to the cold, silent shell of car 17, as if seeking answers in the very air, in the lingering scent of blood and fear. The car stood abandoned on a siding, a forgotten relic of a nightmare that refused to fade. He would stand on the platform, lost in thought, staring at the graffiti-marred walls, the shattered windows, the bloodstains that no amount of industrial cleaner could erase. He could almost hear the echoes of screams, the whispers of terror, the silence that spoke volumes about the horrors that had unfolded within those metal walls. The city might have forgotten, but Riley knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that some things were not so easily forgotten. The silence of train car 17 was a promise, a threat, a reminder that some mysteries have a way of coming back to haunt you. Weeks turned into months, and the case files gathered dust on Riley's desk, a monument to his failure to solve the impossible. He had chased down every lead, interviewed every witness, but the mystery of train car 17 remained unsolved. He had become obsessed, his every waking moment consumed by the case. His personal life suffered, his relationship strained under the weight of his relentless pursuit of answers, but he couldn't let it go, not until he knew what had happened to those people. He had become a familiar face at the train yard, haunting the platform where car 17 stood silent. The workers there had come to accept his presence, offering him nods and knowing glances as he passed. One evening as the sun began its descent, an older worker approached Riley. "You know," the old man said, "they say that sometimes things happen on the rails that can't be explained." Riley looked up, his interest piqued. "What do you mean?" The old man hesitated, his gaze drifting to the silent silhouette of car 17. "They say that sometimes, the rails themselves, they remember." And with a final enigmatic smile, the old man turned and walked away, leaving Riley alone with his thoughts. The old man's words echoed in Riley's mind, the rails themselves, they remember. It was the ramblings of an old man, Riley told himself, a superstitious tale meant to unnerve the uninitiated. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the old man's words held a kernel of truth, a hint of something ancient and unknowable. He found himself returning to the train yard night after night, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. He would stand on the platform, listening to the rhythmic clatter of the trains, the mournful wail of the whistles, trying to decipher the whispers he imagined he heard in the wind. The rails, he realized, were more than just steel and wood. They were arteries, veins of the city, carrying its lifeblood, its secrets, its forgotten stories. And somewhere, buried deep within that network of iron and time, lay the truth about train car 17. He began to research the history of the train line, poring over old maps, newspaper archives, interviewing retired railway workers, searching for any incident, any legend that might offer a clue to the mystery that haunted him. And slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom, a pattern began to emerge. The train line, Riley discovered, followed an ancient path, a route carved through the wilderness long before the city had risen from the swamps. There were stories, whispered tales of Native American burial grounds, of forgotten settlements swallowed by the earth, of a darkness that clung to the land like a curse. He found records of accidents, derailments, disappearances, all clustered around a specific stretch of track, the same stretch where train car 17 had been found empty. Coincidence? Riley refused to believe in coincidences. He spent hours studying the old maps, comparing them to modern aerial photographs, his eyes searching for any anomaly, any point of intersection between the past and the present, between the physical world and the other. And then he saw it. A small unmarked circle on one of the oldest maps, located at the precise point where the train line intersected with a long-forgotten trail, a trail that led deep into the heart of what was now the city's sprawling urban sprawl. The circle was labeled in a faded, spidery script, "The Place of Whispers." Armed with this newfound knowledge, Riley returned to train car 17 one last time. The sky was the color of bruised plums, the air thick with the promise of rain. The train car stood silent and accusing, its shadow stretching long and thin in the fading light. He stepped inside, the familiar scent of stale blood and fear washing over him. He stood for a moment, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the unseen world pressing down on him. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that the answers he sought were not here, not anymore. The rails had whispered their secrets, had led him to the threshold of the unknown. Now, it was up to him to cross over. He exited the train car, the setting sun painting the world in hues of blood and shadow. He didn't look back. He turned and walked away, following the path laid out by the rails, the whispers, the forgotten stories. He walked towards the heart of the city, towards the place of whispers, towards the darkness that had called to him from the moment he first set foot on train car 17. He walked away from the known and into the unknown, leaving behind the mystery unsolved, the silence unbroken, the train car waiting for its next passenger.